After saving all year, I paid $20,000 so my children and grandchildren could see Hawaii. At the gate, my son told me, "Dad, you're not coming. Go home." My name wasn't even on the list. I stood frozen with my suitcase, humiliated. But what I uncovered next turned their perfect vacation into a nightmare they would never forget. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room that evening, the house too quiet, the air too still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until it hurts. Across from me, on the mantel above the fireplace, sat a framed photograph of Margaret, my late wife. She was smiling in that photo, her hand resting gently on mine, both of us younger, both of us still believing that family was the one investment that never failed. I stared at that photograph for a long time, and the memories started flooding back like waves I could no longer hold back. I remembered the first time David asked me for help with college. He was barely 18, still carrying that reckless confidence of youth. Tuition alone was nearly $60,000, money I could have used to pay down the mortgage faster or put aside for my retirement. But I paid it without hesitation. I told myself, this is what fathers do. They make sacrifices so their children can have opportunities they never had. I never once called it a loan. I never once asked for repayment. It was a gift, wrapped in love and quiet pride. Then came the car. He had just graduated and needed a way to get to work. He wanted something modest, he said, but when we went to the dealership, his eyes lit up at a newer model, shiny red with leather seats. $25,000. I signed the check because the look on his face reminded me of Christmas mornings when he was a boy, tearing into wrapping paper like the world was his. Again, I told myself, this is what fathers do. They give when their children need. And then there was the hospital bill. Laura, his wife, was giving birth to Emily, my first grandchild. The insurance covered part of it, but not enough. David sounded panicked on the phone, his voice breaking as he explained the costs. $20,000. I didn't even blink. I wired the money that same afternoon. Because when a new life is coming into this world, money should never be the thing that casts a shadow. But now, sitting in this chair with Margaret's picture staring back at me, all those numbers felt different. They weren't acts of love anymore. They had been turned into debts, used against me, as if my worth could be measured only in what I could pay. I realized with a sinking heart that every sacrifice, every act of generosity had become another brick in the prison they were building around me. The truth of what had just happened at the airport was sinking in deeper with every breath. My own son looked me straight in the face and told me to go home after I had paid $20,000 for a vacation that didn't even include me. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't poor planning. It was betrayal, plain and simple. The house around me held the weight of all those years. This home, valued now at nearly $550,000, had been the anchor of our family. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every late-night talk with Margaret, every scraped knee of David's childhood had happened within these walls. I had kept the mortgage low, always careful, always planning for the day I might pass it on to David and Susan. Besides the house, I had my savings account, $280,000 carefully set aside through decades of steady work as an engineer. And then, of course, there was Margaret's inheritance, what she had worked for and guarded, the little nest egg she told me to protect for the family. All of it, I now realized, was under threat, not from strangers, not from thieves in the night, but from my own blood. The people I had raised, the ones who called me Dad and Grandpa, had been planning behind my back. The memory of the dinner table flashed in my mind, the empty chair where Margaret used to sit, the laughter that once filled this house, now replaced by uncomfortable silences, the birthday cards David used to make with crayons where he scribbled, "I love you, Dad." Those same hands that once handed me cards had signed documents that excluded me. The betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about erasing me. Erasing the very person who had built this foundation brick by brick. I felt the shift inside me slowly. At first, when David's words hit me, "Dad, you should just go home," It was like being punched in the stomach. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Shock wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. But shock doesn't last forever. It gives way to anger. And anger, if you hold it long enough, transforms into clarity. I replayed every detail of the Hawaii trip in my mind. The hotel reservations, the rental car, the tours for snorkeling and sightseeing, all of it planned, paid for, and finalized without a single mention of my name. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me deliberately. 6 weeks before the trip, they had already set the plan in motion. I whispered into the empty room, my voice shaking but steadying with each word. "Margaret, if only you were here, you'd tell me not to let them treat me like this." I could almost hear her response, gentle but firm, the way she always spoke when life tested us. "Henry, you are not weak. Don't let kindness be mistaken for weakness." Her absence burned, but her memory gave me strength. The realization hit me with the force of a hammer. I was not powerless. They wanted me to believe that, to accept my role as the wallet, the old man too confused to fight back. But I still held cards they didn't know about. Pain has a way of sharpening the senses. I sat there, staring at the oak desk Margaret had chosen years ago, the one where she used to write her nursing notes late into the night. On top of it sat the file cabinet, lined with folders she had labeled in her careful handwriting. My hand lingered on the drawer marked Financial. I pulled it open. Inside were the documents that told the true story of my life: tax returns, investment statements, deeds, and receipts. I saw the title to the house, Margaret's name, and mine together, still binding us even after death. I saw the savings account book, proof of every dollar I had saved, dollar by dollar, for decades. My eyes caught on the watch I had given David when he turned 18, sitting there in the drawer, as if mocking me. I remembered how proud he had been that day, showing it off to his friends, promising he would always treasure it. Now it was nothing but a symbol of how far he had drifted from that boy. The pain I felt wasn't just in my chest, it was physical, like being stabbed straight through the heart. Every paper, every memory was another cut. But it was also fuel. With each document I touched, I realized more clearly. They think I'm powerless. They're wrong. I reached deeper into the drawer and found the folder that held the copies of the deed to the house and the savings account statements. My fingers trembled as I pulled them out, not from weakness, but from the weight of realization. In those papers lay the truth. The legal power was still in my hands. They could try to manipulate, they could try to scheme, but without my consent, without my signature, they had nothing. I held those documents tightly and whispered again. They think I'm powerless. They're wrong. My voice was steadier now. The anger was no longer wild. It was focused. I understood that my role was no longer to be the giver who was taken for granted. My role now was to be the guardian, the protector of what Margaret and I had built. I could see the path unfolding before me. The vacation was just the spark, but the fire had been smoldering for years. It was time to take control, to act, to stop being the man everyone thought they could manipulate. The late afternoon sun streamed through the curtains, painting the room in golden light. It fell across the old wedding photograph on the wall, Margaret in her white dress, me in my black suit, both of us smiling with the unshakable belief that family was forever. The rays lit up the dust motes in the air, each one floating, shimmering, like fragments of memory. I sat back in my chair, the house around me, both a comfort and a reminder of what had been lost. The couch still carried the faint scent of Margaret's perfume, even after all these years. The wooden floor creaked in familiar spots, the same ones that used to make us laugh when the kids ran across it too fast. Every corner of the room whispered of love, but also of absence. Yet in that stillness, I felt something stirring inside me. I wasn't just a man abandoned at an airport. I wasn't just a father discarded by his own son. I was still Henry Parker, and I still had strength left in me. I rose from the chair, documents in hand, the golden light now bathing me like a quiet blessing. The sense of loneliness was still there, heavy and sharp, but beneath it was the beginning of something else. determination, resolve. A quiet fire that Margaret herself would have recognized. This was not the end. This was the turning point. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I didn't sleep after the airport. I didn't even try. I set the folder on Margaret's oak desk, took a breath, and reached for the landline because I wanted the weight of a real call, not a tap on a screen. The room was quiet except for the clock in the hallway and the soft hum of the refrigerator down the corridor. I dialed the airline. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. My heart wasn't steady at all, but I didn't let them hear that. The agent answered with a smile in her voice. I told her my name and asked her to check a reservation for my family to Honolulu. I kept my tone calm, almost casual. She typed. I could hear the faint rhythm of her keyboard, like rain on a roof. Then she said the words I already knew were coming. The booking was made 6 weeks ago, 4 passengers. She read the names, one by one, like reading a list of strangers. David, Laura, Emily. And then, Margaret, my dead wife? Not me. Never me. I let the silence do the work for a moment. Then I asked if there had been any changes. She said no. The reservation had never included me. I asked for the record locator, and she gave me a string of letters and numbers. I wrote it down in sharp, dark ink, each character pressed deep enough to dent the page beneath. I asked if she could email me a confirmation of the booking date and names for my records. She said yes. She didn't know she had just handed me a brick of truth. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the paper until the letters stopped swimming. 6 weeks. They planned to erase me 6 weeks ago. Not a mistake, not a last-minute mix-up. I could feel the cold settle into my bones, but under the cold was a pilot light, flickering back to life. I stood up, stretched the stiffness from my back, and walked to the kitchen for coffee I didn't need. The mug warmed my hands. The bitterness steadied my mind. I picked up the phone again. This time, I called the Grandwa Resort. The line rang twice. A man answered with the soft hospitality that makes you drop your guard. I didn't drop mine. I told him I was calling about a reservation, 10 nights, ocean view, 7 guests. He found it. He sounded impressed by the scale of it, as if the dollar signs were glowing on his screen. I told him I needed to cancel. He warned me about the penalty. $3,200 charged immediately. I said that was acceptable. He hesitated, surprised by how quickly I agreed. He processed it, confirmed the timestamp, and offered to email the cancellation notice. I asked him to please include the exact time and the notation that the primary booking party had requested the cancellation. He said, "Of course, sir." I thanked him and asked a final question, almost an afterthought. What would happen when the guests arrived tomorrow? He said they would be informed that the reservation had been canceled by the primary. He repeated the time. I repeated it back. Then I hung up and set the phone on the desk carefully, like setting down a loaded tool. I sat for a while, not moving, listening to the house breathe. The wood in the walls shifted as the evening cooled. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then gave up. I reached for a notepad. I wrote the airline record locator, the call time, and the agent's first name. I wrote the resort's confirmation number, the penalty amount, and the exact minute the file was closed. I was building a timeline. I was building a case. I was taking back the narrative from people who thought I would simply swallow their story. I opened the laptop Margaret and I had bought the year before she got sick. It still had a sticker from the little computer store on Lakeshore. I logged in, opened my email, and found 2 new messages already waiting. One from the airline with the reservation details. 6 weeks prior, 4 names, one of them the woman I buried 3 years ago. One from the resort with the cancellation confirmation, processed now, stamped with today's date and the exact time my hand had moved across the desk to say yes. I downloaded the PDFs and saved them in a new folder I titled, carefully, Family Trip Documents. Kind, clean, neutral. The truth doesn't need exclamation points. I could have stopped there. I could have shut the machine, turned off the lights, told myself that the damage was done and couldn't be undone, that the lesson had already been delivered. But that would have been the old me, the man who absorbed the cost so others could remain comfortable, who paid and smiled and told himself this was love. That man had been left at the airport like a piece of luggage someone didn't want to claim. I was not leaving myself behind again. I opened my banking app. I changed my password. I enabled two-step verification on everything. I set alerts on transfers above $500. I checked the authorized users on every card. There were none, but I checked anyway. I looked at the savings account I had built dollar by dollar over 4 decades, 280,000 reasons to stay awake. I set a verbal password with the bank. I wrote it down once in my book and locked the book in the top drawer. The sound of the key turning felt like an amen. By then, the clock had slid past midnight. The house was darker, the edges of the furniture softening into shadows. I brewed another pot of coffee I didn't need. I stood in the kitchen while it hissed and sighed. I poured a cup, carried it back to the desk, and found my inbox glowing with a third message. David. Subject line, help. No apology, no confession, not even a please. I clicked it open anyway because a father can't help himself. He had attached a spreadsheet, 3 tabs, costs, forecast, reimbursement. The numbers were neat, centered, and labeled like a small business. Flights, shuttle, meals. A line for emergency lodging that hadn't yet been spent. At the bottom, in bold, a request, $5,000 wired ASAP, so the kids wouldn't have to sleep on the floor of a lobby. The body of the email was worse than the spreadsheet. It was short and it was cold. If you still want to be called Grandpa, prove it. I read that line 3 times. Then I read it out loud, not for anyone else, but to hear what it sounded like in the air of my home. If you still want to be called Grandpa, prove it. Not please. Not we're sorry. No, we made a mistake, we were wrong. Can we talk? Just a price tag on a title that used to be a blessing. I set the mug down and felt the heat leave my hands. I felt something rise in me that wasn't rage and wasn't grief. It was older than both. It was dignity, waking up and standing with me in my living room. I didn't reply. I printed the email. I saved the spreadsheet. I took a pen and wrote the time in the margin and the words, leveraged grandchildren. Noted. Then I slid the paper into the folder and sat back in the chair until the stiffness in my neck loosened again. The phone rang. Hawaii. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I knew the area code. I answered because I wanted to hear exactly what they would say when the mask came off. David started speaking before I could say hello. His voice was loud and urgent, heavy with accusation. He said I had no right. He said the kids were crying. He said the hotel lobby was cold. He said a lot of things that were designed to shove me back into the old corner, the one marked ATM and doormat, and Dad, who will fix it if we push hard enough. I didn't answer the way he wanted. I didn't rush. I didn't comfort. I didn't defend myself. I kept my voice even. I asked him to slow down. I picked up my pen and wrote as he spoke. He said, "You're going to regret this." I wrote it down. He said, "You ruined everything." I wrote it down. He said, "Old man, do you even understand what you've done?" I wrote it down and underlined it once. Then I told him I understood exactly. I told him I had canceled a reservation I had paid for. The line went quiet for the first time. Then Laura was in the background, sharp and breathless. She said things about me that didn't belong to the man I am, but I wrote the gist anyway. I wrote the time at the top of the page. California time and Hawaii time both, because judges like precision, and so do I. I didn't quote the whole conversation back to them. That would have turned it into a fight. I waited for a break and said one sentence, clear and simple. "This is the last time you will speak to me like this." The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the silence a child leaves when he realizes the parent in front of him isn't the same one he pushed yesterday. Then David laughed, a short, brittle sound, and said, "You'll fold. You always do." I said, "Not this time." Then I hung up, because a man is allowed to hang up when the words on the other end only eat at him. I sat there with the phone in my hand and the room still. I put the receiver down gently and drew a box around the words I had written. "You're going to regret this, old man." I wrote another line beneath it in my own handwriting, for me. Evidence of coercion, threats, disrespect. I slid that page into the folder and opened a new one and titled it simply, Timeline. The hours between 1 in the morning and 3 are different from other hours. They are honest. They ask you questions you've been avoiding. They offer you a kind of companionship if you're willing to tell the truth. I told myself the truth as I printed bank statements and highlighted transfers from the last few years that had bled slowly into David's life, like a slow leak. Mortgage help, tuition, hospital bills, holidays. I stacked the papers until they were an inch thick and banded them with a rubber strap. I labeled the stack, Support Provided. Then I prayed, not for them, not yet. I prayed for clarity. I took out my wallet and found the old card I had kept behind my driver's license. Thomas Reynolds, Estate Planning and Family Law. He had helped me with Margaret's will, and he had been both kind and firm, the only combination that has ever made sense to me. His office number was the same as it had been. I called. It went to the answering service because the good ones sleep like the rest of us. I left a message with my full name, my number, and 6 words I never thought I would have to say. I need to revise my estate. After I hung up, the house seemed to exhale. I walked to the back door and looked out over Margaret's garden. The moon gave the shrubs a silver edge. The wind didn't move. I whispered to her. Not because I expected an answer, but because marriage is a conversation that doesn't end with a funeral. I said, "I'm doing what you would have done." I said, "I'm not going to let them turn our life's work into their playground." I said, "I love you." Then I closed the door and locked it, because locking it felt like a small, clean promise to the man I still am. By morning, the emails had multiplied. Another from David, shorter, angrier. A few texts that said the same thing, but with fewer letters, as if brevity could turn cruelty into urgency. One from Susan, softer, confused, asking me to please talk to them when they get back to help her understand. I didn't answer any of them, not yet. I wrote Susan's name down in the margin and circled it. I would call her later when my feet were under me and my voice wouldn't wobble between love and fury. I poured coffee I didn't need and sat down again. At 9, I called the county recorder's office and asked about title alerts. The woman on the phone told me how to enroll in an online system that would notify me if anyone filed anything against the house. I wrote the steps down and followed them exactly. The confirmation number spat back at me like a receipt for peace of mind. I printed it and added it to the folder. I sent a note to my insurance agent asking for copies of every policy with my name on it. He replied in 12 minutes. I thanked him in 3. I was building a lattice. I was building a fence. I was building the thing I should have built the first time David asked me for money without a plan. Around 10, the airline agent from last night called me back because she had promised to send the confirmation and wanted to make sure I had received it. I told her I had. She said she was sorry for the confusion and hoped everything worked out. I said thank you, and I meant it. Empathy from a stranger in a world that keeps moving is a small mercy. After we hung up, I slid her email into the folder and wrote her name on a Post-it in case a judge ever wanted to hear a voice that wasn't mine. By noon, the resort sent a second email with the final cancellation receipt, the penalty charged and applied, the ledger adjusted in a neat column. I highlighted the line that showed the exact time. I imagined David standing at that check-in desk with his printed itinerary, hearing the clerk say there was no room. I didn't smile at the picture. Didn't. I didn't cheer. Justice doesn't need cheering. It needs documentation. I ate a sandwich I couldn't taste and opened the spreadsheet David had sent one more time. The second tab, Forecast, had a note in red letters. We expected Grandpa to cover this part. The word Grandpa did not belong next to a cell full of dollar signs. I exported the file to a PDF and saved it with the rest. Then I opened a new document and wrote the sentence that would anchor the rest of my week. They think I'll fold. They don't know I've spent a lifetime solving bigger problems than their greed. I said it out loud. Then I said it again, slower, because I wanted to hear the music in it. I have spent a lifetime solving bigger problems than their greed. It was true. I had solved problems in labs and in offices and in rooms where men fought with words and walked out as if they had been bloodied. I had kept systems running and projects moving and workers safe. I had navigated deadlines and budgets and bosses who didn't understand what they were asking for. I could navigate this. I would navigate this. The phone rang again, and this time I let it go to voicemail. David's voice filled the room, sharp and clipped. He said the kids were upset, that I was cruel, that a real grandfather would never do this. He said we would talk when he got home and that I better be ready to make things right. He used the phrase, make things right, like a weapon, as if right meant only one thing, his way. I saved the voicemail. I wrote 3 words beneath it in my notes, guilt as leverage. By mid-afternoon, the edges of my anger had cooled into something that could hold shape. I took the folder, the binder, and the small stack of printed emails and laid them out on the desk. I added tabs with labels because lawyers like tabs, and so do I. Airline, resort, bank, communications, timeline, support provided. I slid the business card for Thomas Reynolds into the clear pocket at the front, the way a soldier slides a photograph into a helmet strap. Then I called his office a second time, not because the first message hadn't mattered, but because I wanted a human voice. This time a receptionist answered. She recognized my name from Margaret's case because kindness keeps records even when computers don't. She told me Thomas could see me tomorrow afternoon. She asked if everything was all right. I said it would be. The rest of the day moved like water over rocks. I returned one call to Susan and kept it short. I told her I loved her. I told her I was fine. I told her I would talk when I was ready. She cried a little and told me she didn't understand any of it. I told her I knew. Then I asked her a question she didn't expect. Did you know about the reservation? She said no, and I believed her because you can hear the difference between a lie and the truth even over the phone. I told her I would explain everything soon and then change the subject to her garden, the tomatoes, the way summer makes the air smell like cut grass, and childhood. We said goodbye before the conversation could fold in on itself and become something else. As evening came on, the house relaxed into that familiar glow you only get when the sun is low and the dust floats like a galaxy in your living room. I turned on the lamp by the sofa Margaret loved and sat for a while with the binder closed, my hands resting on the cover. I wasn't rehearsing arguments. I wasn't writing speeches in my head. I was remembering who I am when I am not explained by other people's needs. Around 7, I checked my email one more time. Another message from David arrived, shorter than the last, angrier than the last. He wrote that he had looked up elder abuse laws. He said what I had done might qualify. I laughed then, not with humor, but with something next door to it, that strange sound a body makes when it recognizes irony and refuses to be bullied by it. I printed the email and added it to the stack called Communications, because when people show you the tools they plan to use on you, it helps to write them down. I cleaned the kitchen even though it wasn't dirty. I wiped the counters as if a clean surface could mean a clean mind. I checked the back door again. I watered the plants Margaret had loved most. I stood for a while over the thermometer she had stuck into the soil of a stubborn fern and said, "You were right about this one. It wants more shade than I gave it." The fern did not answer. It simply was, living, green, unapologetic. Night deepened, but I didn't feel small inside it. I felt contained. I made a list for the morning in a neat column. Print identification. Bring a marriage certificate. Bring deed copy. Bring savings statements. Bring the timeline. Bring communications. Bring calm. I wrote that last word and boxed it. Calm is a choice, but it's also a tool. In rooms where people shout, the calm one often wins. Before bed, I listened to one last voicemail. It was short. It was Laura. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She said one sentence, clipped clean as a paper cut. "This is on you." She hung up. I didn't save it because I didn't need to. It had already joined the others in my head, the words people use when they want you to carry their load. I whispered into the dark, not for her, but for me. No, not anymore. Sleep came late and hard, the way it does after a storm. When I woke, the air felt new. The sun through the curtains painted a pale stripe across the floorboards. I had refinished myself the summer Susan graduated high school. I made breakfast and ate it slowly. Eggs, toast, a slice of melon that tasted like July. Then I dressed in a simple gray shirt, the one Margaret liked because the color made my eyes look kind. I put the binder in a plain canvas bag, slid Thomas's card into my shirt pocket, and sat in the chair by the window to review the timeline one last time. At 10 on the dot, my phone rang. Thomas himself. His voice is the kind of voice you want in a courtroom, measured, warm, never hurried. He confirmed the appointment for tomorrow at 2. He asked me, without prying, if I was all right. I told him the truth. I said, "I'm better than last night." He said, "That's a good direction." Then he asked me to bring everything. I told him I had everything and more. He chuckled softly and said, "Then we'll make good use of it." After we hung up, I set the phone down and looked at the room the way you look at an old friend. The light on the picture frames, the mark on the baseboard where a chair had scraped the year of Susan's 6th birthday party, the dent in the rug where Margaret used to put her feet when she sat to read. The house wasn't a building to me. It was a ledger of love, an archive of presence, a museum curated by time itself. They had tried to turn it into collateral for their comfort. I would not let them. With the morning still soft around me, I opened the binder, slipped a fresh sheet of paper into the front sleeve, and wrote in large letters, like the title of a play with only one act, "Tomorrow." Under it, in smaller script, I wrote the sentence that had been ringing in my head since the night before. They wanted a game? I've played tougher ones. I closed the binder and stood up. The room seemed to stand with me. I carried the bag to the hall table, the one where Margaret used to lay the mail. I set the bag down gently, ready for tomorrow, like a soldier placing his helmet by the door. Then I went to the kitchen, washed my coffee cup, dried it, and set it back on the shelf where it belonged. I touched the rim with one finger and felt a steadiness move up my arm and settle behind my ribs. It wasn't joy. It wasn't anger. It was something heavier and better. It was resolved. By afternoon, I had done everything a man can do in a house before the law begins its work. I walked out to the mailbox and slid the flag down because there was nothing I wanted to send today except intention, and that kind of mail doesn't need a stamp. On the way back up the walk, I looked at the rose bush Margaret had planted the spring our grandson was born. It had one late bloom on it, red and stubborn and open. I stood there for a full minute and let the sight of it remind me that some things keep their promise, even when people don't. I went inside. I locked the door. I turned the deadbolt. I put the chain across. Then I leaned my forehead against the wood and breathed out slowly. I was not hiding. I was holding. There's a difference. I whispered for her again, just a handful of words. I'm doing this right. I'm doing this clean. I'm doing this for us. The phone stayed quiet for the rest of the day, as if Hawaii had finally slept. I took that as a good sign. Silence can mean thinking. Silence can mean plotting. But it can also mean that people who believed they were in charge are beginning to feel the shape of a boundary they didn't know existed. I let the silence be what it was. I didn't fill it with more words. I didn't try to manage their feelings from my living room. I managed my own. Evening returned. I made a simple supper and ate it at the table where Margaret and I had sat 1,000 times. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't turn on the radio. I listened to the small domestic sounds a house makes when you love it. The click of the thermostat, the sigh of a vent, the whisper of the fridge, the tick of the clock. Then I stood, took my plate to the sink, washed it, and put it on the rack. Ordinary chores, sacred rhythm. Proof that the world still works when you tell the truth. When the sky outside had turned the color of old pennies, I turned off the lamps and walked back to the hall table. I checked the bag again because men like me check things twice. Papers, IDs, binder, pen, card, calm. I smiled at that last word because writing it had made it real. I picked up the bag, carried it to my bedroom, and set it by the chair where I put my shoes on each morning. Then I pulled the curtains, turned down the bed, and sat on the edge for a moment with my hands on my knees. I spoke one last sentence into the dark because sometimes the oldest prayers are the simplest. Keep me steady. I lay down. I closed my eyes. The house held me like a hand. Sleep came, not quickly, not cleanly, but it came. In the gray light before dawn, I woke with a thought that didn't feel like mine. It felt like it belonged to the man I had been at 25, at 40, at 60, when a problem appeared and the room needed someone to stop the slide. The thought was this: decisions win days. I said it out loud to the quiet room, then I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stood up, and felt the floor solid under my feet. Tomorrow, I'll make this official. They wanted a game? I've played tougher ones. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. Thomas Reynolds kept his office on the 15th floor of a glass tower that looked out over the bay. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and quiet money. I arrived 10 minutes early with my canvas bag, my binder, and a steadiness that felt earned. The elevator doors opened on a corridor of dark wood and framed photographs of bridges. I paused at one black and white print of the Bay Bridge fading into fog, steel vanishing into white. Strength meeting silence. That felt like my day. His receptionist greeted me by name, offered water, and led me into a conference room where the table was long and the chairs were firm. Ferries stitched white threads across the water beyond the glass. I set the binder in front of me and kept still. Waiting can be an act of control when you refuse to fidget. I folded my hands and let my breathing slow until my heart matched the hum of the building. Thomas came in with a file under his arm and a pen already uncapped. He shook my hand, met my eyes, and told me he was sorry for what had happened. He sat, opened his pad, and said, "Begin whenever you are ready." I began. I laid out the facts in order, the way an engineer trusts sequence. The airline record made 6 weeks earlier. 4 seats, my name absent, Margaret's name included, as if grief could be booked like luggage. The resort reservation for 10 nights, ocean view, 7 guests, was canceled at my instruction, with the penalty paid. The spreadsheet David sent overnight, neat columns, and a red note that said, "Grandpa will cover this part." The email that asked for $5,000 more to keep the kids comfortable. The line at the bottom that stung worse than any number. "If you still want to be called Grandpa, prove it." I slid copies of everything and a timeline with times written in clean ink. Thomas asked simple questions that cut to the bone. Did I have copies? I did. Did I keep times? I did, had I responded. Only once to set a boundary. He nodded and said we had 3 tasks. Protect what exists. Document what I intend. Deliver the message. First, we would lock down title alerts and require my voice for any transfer. Second, we would replace my old will with a clear current plan. Third, we would decide how and when to tell my son the truth he kept trying to bend. He asked what I wanted, not what I feared. I told him I wanted my $550,000 house safe inside a trust, my $280,000 in savings guarded, and my dignity restored. I wanted my grandchildren to be protected from being turned into bargaining chips. I was done with being an emergency fund that excused other people from growing up. He wrote a single neat sentence that said it all and slid the pad toward me as if to let me own the words. We talked structure. A new will, clean and simple, will pour into a revocable trust with me as trustee while I live. Beneficiaries would be named charities when I am gone. I listed the places close to my life. A scholarship at the engineering school where I still mentor. A fund for after-school programs at the community center down on Lakeshore. A portion for senior services that kept Margaret company in her last year. He nodded, already shaping clauses in his head, placing cables where weight would land. He asked about Susan. I told him I would not punish the child who had not wronged me, but I would not draft a plan that dragged her into a courtroom between me and her brother. We agreed the gifts would be charitable, the language firm, the door open to a relationship without leverage. Then he asked whether I wanted David named anywhere. I said the word no with a calm I felt in my bones. He wrote the word exclusion and drew a box around it. He called in his paralegal to begin the paperwork. We were halfway through routine authorizations when the phone on the credenza rang. The receptionist announced to caller, "Laura, urgent." Thomas lifted his eyebrows. I nodded once. He put the call on speaker because sunlight helps the truth. Laura's voice came through thin and bright. She did not ask how I was. She said one sentence that hollowed the room. "If you go through with this, you will never see Emily and Noah again." I said her name once, gently, as if to give her a chance to hear herself. Then I answered with the only words that fit. "This is not love. This is extortion." She rushed into a flood of claims that I was confused, that someone was manipulating me, that people would say I had lost my mind. I let the wave break. When it ended, I said, "I will not be threatened." The line went dead. Thomas clicked a small recorder, stated the time, the content, and set it aside like a fragile exhibit. We moved straight into the will. Thomas dictated clauses in a steady cadence. The trust would hold the house. The will would pour into it. The beneficiaries would be the scholarship and the community fund, and the senior program, each named plainly with addresses and tax numbers. The exclusion language was careful and complete. Any person who contested without cause would forfeit any token gift. He asked me to initial each page. I did, slow and deliberate, my letters dark as nails in fresh wood. A notary entered, checked my identification, and asked simple questions about the date, the city, my age, my children, and my property. I answered in full sentences because full sentences sound like a mind at home. We stepped into a smaller room with a camera on a tripod. Thomas recorded a brief capacity acknowledgement, my voice steady, my eyes clear. When we finished, the paralegal printed clean copies and brought a fireproof envelope for the originals. We signed the deed, transferring the title of the house into the trust, retained control, and noted it in neat legal type. We signed a letter to my bank directing them to require my in-person verification for any transfer above a set threshold. We updated beneficiaries for accounts that needed it. He handed me certified copies and a slim flash drive with the video. "Keep one set accessible," he said. "Place another in a safe deposit box." I held the drive for a moment, so light for what it carried, then gave it back to his safe. We took a breath. The bay below glittered like broken glass turned to jewelry. Thomas asked whether I wanted to notify David now, or wait. I said I wanted him to learn it, where echoes help truth sink in. He nodded. Airports have echoes. He dictated a letter for David and Laura, plain and final, stating the decisions, the reasons, and a refusal to engage with threats. A copy for Susan would go out as well, so she would not be trapped between versions of the story. By late afternoon, envelopes lay on the table like quiet instruments. Thomas reviewed the plan. We would meet their flight in the arrivals hall, stand where the light was clean, and hand David the letter. No argument, no scenes, just paper and truth. He would stand beside me, not to fight, but to witness. We checked the flight number twice. We wrote down the time. We shook hands, two men agreeing to do a hard thing without flinching. On my way out, I paused again at the bridge photograph. Fog swallowed half the span, but the lines underneath were true. In the elevator mirror, I saw a man who had chosen, not a man who had been chosen for. The ground floor swallowed me and gave me back to the street. The air off the water was clean and a little cold. It felt like permission. The next day, I woke before the alarm, dressed, and slid the letter into my inside pocket. I drove to the airport in light traffic while the sky turned from gray to blue. Thomas waited near the arrivals board with his portfolio, his tie simple, his shoes quiet. We checked the board. On time. We moved to the rail where families gather and made a small island of stillness in a river of noise. Waiting, again, was control. The doors slid open and people poured through. I let faces wash past until Laura appeared, scanning, lips tight. Emily and Noah came behind, their small bags bumping their heels. David followed, looking down at his phone, then up. He saw me and stopped without meaning to. I stepped one pace forward and said his name once. David. I took the envelope from my pocket and held it out. He hesitated, then took it, as if contact burned. He tore it open and read where he stood. His eyes moved fast at first, then slower as the meaning reached him. He reached the paragraph that excluded him from inheritance and stripped his authority over my affairs. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Thomas, then at me, then back at the words as if they might rearrange into mercy. Laura leaned over his arm. Her face went pale. She said I could not do this. I answered with the truth that fit in a single line. I have done it. David's voice climbed. He said I had lost my mind. He said a lawyer had brainwashed me. He said I was choosing money over blood. I kept my voice even. This is legal. This is final. This is mine. He began to talk in the plural, the way people do when they hope a crowd can carry them. We were stressed. We were going to surprise you later. We were going to fix it. The words were thin. People nearby glanced, then looked away the way airports teach you to look away. Laura said they would contest. Thomas answered in a mild tone that any lawyer would see capacity, clarity, and cause. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply existed like a stone in a stream, unmoved by the current. David said he would talk to Susan as if her name were a lever. I told him Susan already had the truth in her hands, and I would not use her to carry his disappointment. He blinked, then tried anger again, and found it did not hold. Emily tugged at Laura's sleeve and asked if they were still getting pancakes. The question cut through the noise with a child's clean blade. I looked at my granddaughter and softened my face so she would not have to carry our words. Then I stepped back half a pace, the universal sign for done. David took a breath that rattled like paper and said, "Families work things out." I said, "Families tell the truth." He said I was cruel. I said I was done being leveraged. The word abuse sat between us like a small, heavy box. He lowered the letter. The arrivals hall resumed its usual tide of voices, gates, luggage wheels. Laura shifted the children a step away, eyes calculating angles that no longer existed. David folded the paper once, twice, 3 times, as if smaller paper meant smaller consequences. He slid it into his pocket like a stone. Thomas touched my elbow lightly and murmured, "We are done here." I nodded because we were. We turned and walked toward the escalators. Behind us, David called my name in a voice that belonged to a younger year. I did not turn. Outside, the air smelled like exhaust and salt. Thomas asked if I needed a ride. I told him I was fine. He said he would follow me for a mile anyway. He did. Then he peeled off with a small wave, and I drove the rest of the way in a silence that did not accuse me. Home was as I had left it. I set the canvas bag on Margaret's desk, opened the curtains, and let afternoon light fall across the wood she had polished for years. Dust rose in the beam and hovered like a small galaxy. I made tea. I sat at the table. I put the certified copies in the drawer with stamps and tape. I whispered to the photograph on the shelf. "We did it clean, Maggie. No shouting, no smearing. Just paper and lines and a door that closes and holds." The practicals were simple now. The deed recorded into the trust would anchor a house worth $550,000. The letters to my bank would force every large transfer to meet my face. The beneficiary forms closed doors that had been left ajar. The scholarship and community gifts were set in print, not a dream. Numbers on paper, yes, but also boundaries in the heart. I felt taller by an inch, not because money lifted me, but because dignity does. By evening, the phone had begun to throb again. Calls I did not answer. Messages I did not open. Stories were already being told somewhere to make sense of shame. I stood at the sink, watched the sky go from silver to blue, and said the new sentence out loud because I wanted to hear its weight. They thought I was weak. They will learn what real consequences look like. The words did not taste bitter. They tasted clean, like cold water after a long walk. I sat in Margaret's chair and watched the streetlights come on one by one. Relief arrived, not as a shout, but as a release in my shoulders I had not noticed I was carrying. Tomorrow would bring tasks, notices to mail, a safe deposit box to visit, perhaps a letter from a lawyer with a tone like sandpaper, perhaps a knock I would not answer. But the main work was done. A plan born in secret had met daylight and dissolved. A boundary had been drawn by the hand that owns the line. Before I left Thomas's office, we read the letter aloud, not for drama, but to hear how truth sounds. It began with my name and the date and moved without adornment. I have revised my estate plan. I have established a revocable trust that will own my home and direct my property upon my death. I have removed you as a beneficiary. I have made gifts to education and community programs. The reasons are specific. Documented financial pressure, recorded threats, attempts to use my grandchildren as leverage. The letter ended with an invitation to speak like adults in the presence of counsel and a clear refusal to bargain with fear. When I reached the airport the next day, the smell of coffee and floor wax hung in the air. Announcements rose and fell. A boy in a red sweatshirt kept jumping to see over the rail. A woman in a denim jacket pressed a handmade sign to her chest. I stood beside Thomas and marveled at the ordinariness of it, because betrayal always thinks it is extraordinary. It is not. It is ordinary when people decide comfort matters more than character. The ordinary room was about to hear an uncommon sentence. When David finished reading, he asked about the house, the account, and the $20,000 I had spent on the trip that did not include me. His questions came like stones, skipping and sinking. I told him the house now sat in trust and would be sold upon my death, the proceeds divided as directed. I told him the savings were protected and that every large movement would require me to be present. I told him the $20,000 was a lesson fee I had already paid. He winced. Truth often costs on both sides. Back home, I opened the windows and let the evening in. A neighbor waved from the sidewalk, the woman who brings soup on holidays. She did not ask questions. She just lifted her hand and held it there for a second. A small lighthouse. I waved back. In the kitchen, the kettle began to whisper. I took the copy of the letter from my pocket, not to second-guess it, but to see its weight on paper. The sentences looked sturdier than they had sounded in my head. They belonged to a man who had decided to stand where he should have been standing all along. My phone buzzed once. A message from Susan. "Thank you for being clear, Dad. I am proud of you." I typed slowly so the words would not crowd each other. "I love you, Susan. We will talk soon, and we will talk kindly." I set the phone face down and let the kitchen hold the quiet. The house breathed with me. Margaret's clock marked the minutes in soft clicks, steady as a tide. I spoke to her photo, photographing the way I do when the day has been big. We kept our promise, Maggie. We protected what we built. We did it without poison. I know there will be more steps. A safe deposit box to visit tomorrow, a meeting with Thomas to file the deed and mail the notices. Maybe one more scene at the airport in the memory of a child who wondered why adults talk with fists made of paper. But the arc has turned. The worst part is over. The next part is living, and living well, and letting consequences ripen on their own branches. Feeling unseen and treated unfairly is heavy, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be recognized, respected, and safe from family extortion, type the keyword justice. Add it below so others know they are not alone. Now take a breath with me and keep watching. We are not done yet. Now see what they do to change all of this. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The airport was crowded that morning, families gathering by the arrivals hall, voices echoing against high ceilings. I stood near the glass doors with Thomas Reynolds by my side, the envelope already in my pocket, heavy, though it weighed almost nothing. The smell of coffee and floor polish hung in the air. I kept my back straight and my eyes steady, reminding myself that this moment wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth. When I saw them coming through the sliding doors, my heart skipped a beat. David walked ahead, his face pale from the long flight, his shoulders tense. Laura trailed just behind him, gripping Emily's and Noah's small hands as if they were shields. Susan was with them too, her eyes flicking nervously around the hall until they settled on me. For a brief second, our eyes met, and I saw something fragile there. Maybe hope, maybe fear. I stepped forward, my shoes clicking against the tile, and said his name. "David!" The sound of it stopped him. He turned, saw the envelope, and his jaw tightened. I extended it without a word. He snatched it from my hand and tore it open right there in the middle of the arrivals hall. His eyes moved quickly, scanning line after line. At first, his expression was confusion, then disbelief, then something darker, rage. His voice rose in a wave that cut through the noise of the terminal. "You cut me out? You rewrote everything?" Laura leaned over his shoulder, her face draining of color as she read. Susan covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." I stayed still, my voice calm. The house, the savings, the investments, they've all been placed in a trust. $600,000 in property, $280,000 in cash, and the rest in investments. It's going to scholarships and community programs. Not to greed, not to manipulate, not anymore. Laura's voice cracked like a whip. "You can't do this. You don't know what you're signing. He's tricking you." She jabbed a finger at Thomas, who stood with his portfolio closed, unshaken. He answered in a quiet tone, the kind that carries more weight than shouting. "Your father is of sound mind. He signed willingly. It's legal. It's final." David's face turned red. "You're destroying this family," he shouted, his voice breaking. People stopped to stare. A mother pulled her child closer, and a man carrying a sign lowered it to watch. The whole hall became a silent jury. I lifted my chin and answered plainly, "I'm saving this family from the sickness of entitlement. You thought I was your wallet, not your father, but I am not your wallet. I am my own man." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Laura grabbed the children's arms and tried to pull them away, but Susan stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He warned you, David. He warned you not to push him. And you didn't listen." For once, she wasn't shielding her brother. She was speaking the truth. David tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. His hand shook as he crumpled the letter back into the envelope, folding it over and over as if smaller paper might mean smaller consequences. Finally, he spat out, "You'll regret this." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, son, I've regretted letting it go on this long. That ends today." With that, I turned. Thomas followed me, and Susan stood frozen as Laura dragged the children toward the exit. I didn't look back. That evening, back home, I sat in my armchair by the window, staring out at the garden Margaret once tended. The roses had bloomed wild without her careful hands, but in the fading light they looked beautiful anyway. I breathed in the quiet. For the first time in years, it felt like my house belonged to me again, not to schemes, not to unspoken debts, but to me. I whispered into the silence, as I often did when the weight grew heavy. "Margaret, for once, I'm not their wallet. I'm my own man." The words felt like both confession and freedom. The legal papers were filed, the trust established, and the will updated. The fight was no longer mine to carry. It was sealed in law, guarded by signatures and notarized stamps. Thomas assured me that even if David tried to contest it, the evidence would bury any claim. The emails, the threats, the spreadsheet demanding more money, all of it was documented, waiting like stone if anyone dared to test it. I sat back, closed my eyes, and let the peace wash over me. Not joy, not triumph, something quieter, deeper, relief. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded like falling dominoes. David and Laura's comfortable life began to crack. Without access to my savings or the promise of inheritance, they were left with their own choices. The credit cards they had maxed out, the car loan they could barely pay, the mortgage they never should have taken on. Whispers spread through the community. Neighbors heard what had happened at the airport. Word traveled fast in our town, and not kindly. I heard from Susan one afternoon over tea. "They're renting a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town," she said softly. "The kids share a room. Laura hates it. David, he won't talk to anyone." I nodded, but said nothing. I didn't need to gloat. Life itself was delivering the lessons I no longer had to teach. Everywhere I went, church, the grocery store, the park, I felt the weight of watching eyes. Some gave me sympathy, some gave me respect, and some gave me quiet admiration, as if I had done what many wished they dared to do, draw a line and hold it. One afternoon, I pulled out Margaret's old photo albums, the ones with curling edges and faded ink. I sat at the kitchen table flipping through them, letting memory wash over me. There were pictures of David as a boy, covered in dirt from playing baseball. Pictures of Susan holding her first report card with a shy smile. Pictures of Margaret in the garden, her hands covered in soil, her face glowing in the sun. I traced a finger over one photo where David had written in crayon, "I love you, Dad." I closed the album and whispered, "What happened to that boy?" My chest tightened, but then I breathed out. I couldn't carry his choices anymore. That was his burden, not mine. Time gave me something better than revenge. Peace. I found myself rediscovering small joys. Early walks by the lake, reading on the porch while the light faded, tending to Margaret's roses with clumsy hands but a patient heart. One morning, I joined a local community group that met every Thursday to plan events for the scholarship fund. We gathered in a modest office with folding chairs and coffee in styrofoam cups. But the energy was electric. We were building something that would outlive us. A place where kids who had nothing could find a door open. A place where sacrifice wasn't stolen. It was multiplied. As I listened to their plans, I felt something stir inside me, something I thought was gone. Purpose. David tried once to call. The phone rang late one night, his number flashing on the screen. I stared at it until it stopped. The next day, a message arrived. "Dad, we need to talk. I can explain." I didn't answer. Weeks later, another came, this time from Laura. "The kids miss you. Please reconsider." I set the phone down and whispered aloud, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." The words were simple, but they felt like armor. I knew cutting ties was not cruel. It was survival. Sometimes love becomes a chain, and breaking it is the only way to breathe again. News of their struggles reached me in fragments. Laura took on extra shifts at the clinic. David borrowed money from friends and lost it in some quick investment scheme. The credit card companies called daily. Neighbors whispered about shouting matches through apartment walls. They had gone from hosts of backyard barbecues to tenants barely keeping the lights on. And yet, despite everything, I did not feel joy in their downfall. What I felt was distance, unnecessary distance, a reminder that choices bear fruit, sweet or bitter, depending on the seed. The lessons became clear to me, sharper with each passing day. For parents, love is sacred, but it cannot become blind. You can give and give until you vanish, until your children forget that you are flesh and not a bank. Parents must remember, kindness must carry boundaries, or else it will be mistaken for weakness. For children, greed and ingratitude are poison. They corrode not only relationships, but futures. David had every chance, a paid education, a car, the comfort of knowing his father would catch him when he fell. But he mistook that net for a hammock, and hammocks do not hold forever, and for all of us, in this strange modern world, the truth is clear. Goodness does not mean surrender. Dignity does not mean cruelty. To stand firm is not to stop loving. It is to finally love yourself enough to say, no more. One evening, sitting again in my armchair with the sun setting in streaks of orange and gold, I whispered the words that felt like the closing of a long book. Respect is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. I looked around the house, at the polished wood floors I had kept clean, at Margaret's wedding portrait on the wall, at the quiet dignity of the place. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by the weight of betrayal. I felt free. As the weeks turned to months, life moved on. I joined a local charity group, the same one that would administer the scholarships. I began volunteering at the community center, tutoring young boys in math, showing them how bridges are built on paper before they rise in steel. They listened, eager, eyes bright. In them, I saw the future David could have had if gratitude had been his guide. One Saturday after a meeting, a woman thanked me. "You're changing lives," she said simply. I smiled, and for once I believed it. Still, reminders lingered. One afternoon, while sorting through Margaret's old things, I found a note she had once written me. "Don't let them use your heart against you." I sat for a long time holding that piece of paper, marveling at how she had seen this storm before I did. Her wisdom felt alive again in that moment. I knew then that even though I had lost a son in some ways, I had not lost myself. And that was the greater victory. The calls stopped eventually. The silence was not cold. It was clean. David and Laura drifted into the background of my life, like voices fading in another room. Susan stayed, though. She came by with her husband, Robert, brought me groceries now and then, and sat with me over tea. She never pushed, never asked me to reconsider. She simply respected the line I had drawn, and that respect meant more than any apology. The story was no longer about loss. It was about reclamation. I had reclaimed my dignity, my peace, my future. Betrayal had cut deep, but boundaries had stitched me back together. I know some will say blood should forgive anything, but I've learned that forgiveness without accountability is just permission to be hurt again, and I will not hand out that permission anymore. As I prepare for tomorrow, I feel something new waiting for me. The community center is planning a new project, and they want me to lead it. I will say yes. I want to build something with my hands again, something Margaret would smile at. Maybe one day I'll tell Emily and Noah the story from my side. Not today. They're still too young. But someday, when they are ready, I'll let them know their grandfather loved them enough to break the chain so they could grow without being taught that greed is normal. For now, I sit in this house, the evening light soft on the walls, and I feel complete. Respect, that is the inheritance I will leave behind. The keys to my new apartment fit easily in my pocket, but every time I used them, I felt a small thrill, the way a boy feels opening the door to his first room. The place wasn't grand, nothing like the house I had once guarded so fiercely. But it was mine. Paid for in full, $200,000, a clean transaction, no strings, no whispered expectations. From my window I could see the park, a sweep of green that softened with each season. In the mornings, children played on the swings, their laughter carrying up to my balcony. In the evenings, the light faded into streaks of pink and gold, the kind Margaret used to call God's paintbrush. I filled the apartment slowly, not with things, but with quiet. A bookshelf with my old engineering manuals, a photograph of Margaret by the window, a worn chair that fit my back perfectly, the one place I could sit for hours with a cup of tea and feel the world slow down. It wasn't the size of the space that mattered anymore. It was the peace. For once in my life, I didn't feel like someone's provider or someone's bank or someone's disappointment. I felt like myself. The days began to take on a rhythm. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I walked to the community center down the street. They had asked me to teach basic technical skills to teenagers who didn't have many chances in life. I showed them how to draw a straight line with a ruler, how to read a blueprint, how to imagine a bridge not as steel and concrete, but as trust and patience made visible. The boys and girls listened, wide-eyed, scribbling notes, their curiosity untouched by cynicism. For the first time in years, I felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with money. One afternoon, after a session, a small boy tugged on my sleeve. His hair was messy, his backpack torn. He looked up and said, "Thank you, Grandpa Henry." The words hit me like a soft hammer. I blinked back the sting in my eyes and smiled. "That's enough family for me," I whispered. And I meant it. The further I moved from the storm, the clearer the lessons became. I realized that self-respect was worth more than blood ties. I thought back to the airport, to the fury in David's eyes, to Laura's bitter threats, to Susan's stunned silence. For so long, I had believed family loyalty meant swallowing hurt. I thought being a father meant never drawing a line. But that was wrong. Loyalty without respect is slavery, and parenthood without boundaries is a trap. One evening, sitting by the window with the park lights twinkling below, I whispered to myself, "I don't need their apology. I have my peace." The words tasted true. They were the words I should have spoken years ago. I heard about David and Laura in bits and pieces. A neighbor mentioned that David had lost his job. Another said Laura was working nights, bitterness etched into her face. Susan came to visit me once, bringing a basket of fruit. She looked tired. She said, "They sent you a letter. It's on the counter." I walked over and picked it up. The handwriting was David's. My heart hesitated for a second, but then I slid it into the drawer, unopened. Some choices don't need revisiting. I didn't need to read excuses or pleas. Closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from the courage to refuse reopening wounds. I whispered, "No, David, this door stays closed." As the weeks turned into months, my world grew lighter. At the community center, the kids started bringing their friends. Soon I had a dozen eager faces watching as I drew lines across the chalkboard. We talked about numbers, about trust, about building something that lasts. In their bright eyes, I saw the kind of gratitude that David had long forgotten. And I realized, family is not always blood. Sometimes family is simply the people who respect you enough to listen. And the lessons I carried became clear, not just for me, but for anyone willing to hear. For parents, never let love blind you into servitude. Sacrifice is sacred, but it must be balanced with boundaries, or else it becomes exploitation. For children, gratitude is the only soil where family roots can grow. Without it, even the strongest tree will rot from the inside. And for people everywhere in this modern world, I understood something else. Character is the only asset no one can steal. Money comes and goes. Houses rise and fall, but dignity once claimed cannot be taken unless you hand it away. One Saturday, while cleaning the bookshelf, I found Margaret's old clock, the one that used to sit on her nightstand. Its tick was faint now, the rhythm uneven, but when I set it on the table, the sound filled the room. I realized time had been trying to teach me all along, every second matters, and no second should be wasted on those who don't value you. That night I sat with the clock ticking beside me, the window open to the soft night air. The park below was quiet, the street lamps glowing like patient guardians. I whispered into the darkness, "I am finally free, and that's the greatest inheritance of all." The next day, the community group announced a new project, a scholarship fund to send local kids to college. They asked me to lead it. I said yes without hesitation. My voice felt strong, my spirit steady. I knew this was what Margaret would have wanted. Not riches passed down to greedy hands, but opportunities passed down to hungry hearts. So here I am now, an old man in a small apartment, watching the sunset through clean glass, feeling more alive than I ever did in a big house filled with resentment. David may still write letters I'll never read. Laura may still whisper blame into the night. But those echoes no longer reach me. They live in a different world, one of regret and bitterness. I live in peace. The truth is simple. Respect is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. And I've learned that even if your own blood forgets it, the world will remind you. A child in a classroom is calling me Grandpa Henry. A young girl smiled when she solved her first math problem. A mother thanked me for tutoring her son. These are the legacies that matter. I don't need to look back anymore. The past is sealed. The wounds are scarred, but healed. The lesson is written clearly in the lines of my life. Family is love and respect, or it is nothing at all. And as the sun dips below the trees, casting long shadows across the park, I lean back in my chair, fold my hands, and let out a deep, contented breath. I am where I belong. I am whole. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.